Hello, I'm Barbara Peters from the Poison Pen, Scottsdale's Mystery Bookstore. With us today, we have one of my favorite people, and certainly one of my favorite crime writer, journalist, broadcaster, book reviewer. What am I leaving out?
Cook and bottle washer.
Val McDermid, winner of the 1996 Gold Dagger Award, which is the British Crime Writers Association's highest honor given to a recipient each year for Best First Novel. So Val, why don't we talk for a moment about your award-winning book, The Mermaid Singing?
Okay, fine by me.
Tell me how a person I refer to in my own vernacular as the Manchester marshmallow, meaning meaning that you are sweet, kind, cat-loving. How did you write a serial killer book of remarkable goriness?
Well, the theory in our household runs that I have multiple personality disorder. I don't know is the short answer, because I don't know where this stuff comes from. It must be somewhere on the inside. The story came at me, sort of plopped into my lap like a gift from the gods, which is quite unusual for the way that I write, because normally I get the germ of an idea and it festers away, and I acquire bits and pieces of information that kind of flow into that. And eventually, over a period of maybe about 3 years, a story emerges and I start to get the shape of what might be a book in my head. But with this, it was entirely different. I was driving down the motorway and I was listening to the radio, and the woman presenter on the radio was interviewing someone to do with a film that had just come out. And out of nowhere, with no connection to what I was listening to on the radio, this whole story just came into my head. You know, who's the protagonist? Who's the villain? What's been going on here? How many murders there are? What do the police think? And I'm sort of thinking, where does this come from? You know, invasion of the body snatchers or what? And it was so vivid, I thought, I have to write this down right now, or I'm going to lose it. So I had to pull the car over at the side of the road, and I was sort of sitting scribbling on the hard shoulder, hoping a policeman doesn't come along and say, "Excuse me, madam, why have you pulled off the road? Have you got a problem with your car?" "No, I've got a problem with my imagination." So I don't know is the short answer. I mean, I'm genuinely squeamish. I sit and watch ER with my hands over my eyes saying, "Can I look yet? Has the blood stopped?"
Well, I have to say, for someone who knows you personally, that when I read it, I was going, perhaps she's had me tricked all along. Wow. It was fascinating. And what I also liked about it, well, maybe you should describe your idea just a little bit before I say what it is that I found so fascinating.
The book has, as it were, two time frames and two voices. The main narrative is a conventional sort of third-person narrative which goes through the search for a killer. And the main protagonists in this are a guy called Tony Hill, who's a clinical psychologist, who gets brought in to help the police with their hunt for a killer. And one of the police officers, Carol Jordan, who is appointed liaison officer with Tony. In parallel to this, well, although not quite in parallel because it starts before the main part, we have the diary of the killer. So we have the diary of the killer that takes us from the point before the first murder is committed right through to the end. And the two stories have a timeline that converges as we gradually get to know more about who the killer is behind the mask, if you like, of the diary. So it's kind of a serial killer thriller that's also a whodunit.
Exactly. That's the part I found fascinating, because so often when you are reading a serial killer book, you know who both sides are, and you're all engrossed in who's going to win or are they going to catch him. But it's fascinating to read one that's really a whodunit on top of everything else.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just the way that it came to me in my head as the idea dropped in the first time it paid a visit. And maybe that's got something to do with the fact that I grew up reading very much in the British whodunit mystery tradition, reading people like Agatha Christie, Ngaio Marsh, Marjorie Allingham, Dorothy Sayers, and moving on to people like Ruth Rendell and Phyllis James. And I think that has always given me the sort of sense that there should be some kind of question at the heart of a book, a mystery that is somehow resolved. Maybe not necessarily the identity of the killer, but there has to be something that is more than just, will they do it, will they catch each other? And I suppose that drives me towards maybe a little more complexity sometimes. more complexity than is good for me sometimes, it has to be said.
When you hear from readers about this book, do they comment on that unusual aspect of it, the question or the whodunit as part of the serial killer thriller?
No, they mostly comment on the extremely unpleasant nature of the killer's imagination. I find them edging away from me sometimes when they ask me where I got the ideas and the details from of what the killer actually does to the victims before they are finally dispatched.
And how, may one ask, are you forensically knowledgeable? Did you just make it up?
Well, in this particular instance, I had very firmly in my head that the killer captured these people and tortured them. And I was having some difficulty actually finding good, reliable material about medieval torture. You know, you get strange looks even from booksellers and librarians who know you well when you say, do you have a good illustrated guide to medieval torture methods? They do look at you a little strangely. So I was kind of stuck. I'd come across a couple of things, but neither of them were really what I wanted. And we happened to be on holiday in Italy. And purely by chance, I'd seen some adverts for a museum of criminology. And my partner, whose MA was in criminology, said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah, we could make a day out." And we were planning to go to San Gimignano anyway, so this was kind of an added bonus. So off we toddled to San Gimignano, thinking we're going to see a museum of criminology. And it turns out that what we actually go and see is this museum of medieval torture.
A gift from the gods.
Absolutely, total. I mean, that's why I feel the mermaid singing has, you know, in so many ways been a gift from somewhere. I mean, there are those who might argue that a gift from the gods is perhaps inappropriate, but a gift from the other place might be more appropriate. But so there I was, surrounded by these hideous, let me qualify that. What they do is hideous. The objects themselves were often very, very beautiful.
You mentioned that the craftsmanship that went into them seemed remarkable.
That was, I think, what I found most spooky of all about the place. You know, some of these are not great hideous lumps of wood and iron that are just sort of thrown together any old how. They're exquisitely made, some of them, beautifully calibrated, perfectly engineered. You look at them, and if you didn't know what they were, you would say, what a marvellous piece of engineering. Or in the case of some of them, which are made out of bronze and chased silver, you would say, oh, if you saw it on the Antiques Roadshow, you'd say, oh, I wonder what that was for. It looks as if it might have been something interesting in the kitchen. And instead, it's something that does something completely unspeakable to another human being. So I'm going around this torture display with my notebook, taking notes and taking photographs, and my partner sort of turned green after about half an hour of this and said, yeah, I have to wait outside. I can't take any more of this. And so that was exactly what I needed in that particular instance. So I was avidly noting down these horrible, horrible things.
Well, but even if you had the tools at your command, applying them presumably was not being demonstrated at the torture. Well, perhaps it was. Was it a wax museum?
No, it was just the implements were there. But the cards describing how these implements carried out their jobs were extremely graphic, I'm bound to say. And the thing I found quite interesting was that I don't speak fluent Italian, but my knowledge of the language is reasonable, reading knowledge. And the thing that I found quite extraordinary was that the English translations were not always the same as the Italian. And I think the English translations had been done by an Italian feminist, because every now and again you'd come across this diatribe against the torturers saying, isn't it interesting how they devised all these tortures against women's sexual parts but not against men's? And you'd read the Italian and think, there's nothing about that on the original card. So I had this notion of this sort of feminist subverting the intentions of the guys who set up the torture museum.
I love it. An agenda right there.
Yeah. Maybe Sisters in Crime had been visiting.
Well, there are, as you point out, fewer sources for this particular source, so maybe it's better known than you thought. I only asked you because I find it so fascinating, you know, because I'd known you for a long time and met you in many contexts, none of which you'd ever suggested to me this lurid imagination when it came to using this.